On August 15, 1967, a highly unusual incident occurred at Portsmouth Airport in Hampshire, when two aircraft of the same type working for the same airline crashed within 2 hours of each other at the same airport, leading to perhaps one of the most unique accidents ever to occur in aviation history. Portsmouth Airport was located on the northeast hillsea corner of Portsea Island, approximately 3 miles from the centre of the harbour town, and had opened in 1932 as its main municipal airport, growing over time to the point that by the 1960s, the field hosted a variety of domestic and international flights, with overseas destinations including the Channel Islands and France, as well as providing a useful stopover point for longer distance services from London, Northern England and Scotland, the airport's layout being of 3 grass runways, 3618, 0725 and 1230 in a triangular formation. Channel Airways, meanwhile, had been established originally in 1946 as East Anglian Flying Services, and quickly introduced a widespread network across Britain, Europe and the Channel Islands, with various hubs situated both at home and abroad, the company changing its name to Channel Airways in October 1962, with the Hawker Siddeley HS 748 turboprop airliner being introduced during the middle of the decade to replace its aging fleet of Douglas DC-3s and DC-4s. On August 15, 1967, the two flights in question were operated by HS 748 Series 2, Golf Alpha Tango Echo Kilo, and Golf Alpha Tango Echo Hotel, the former working a routine flight from Paris to Southend via Portsmouth, carrying 4 crew and 19 passengers, while the latter was flying from Jersey to Portsmouth with a stopover in Guernsey, while carrying 4 crew and 62 passengers, both services up until their arrival at Portsmouth being perfectly uneventful. Weather at the time in Portsmouth was raining with cloud cover at 500 feet, while wind conditions at the time of Golf Alpha Tango Echo Kilo's landing was 6 knots at 030 degrees and 10 knots at 150 degrees for Golf Alpha Tango Echo Hotel, Portsmouth Airport being notable as the last major commercial field in Great Britain to still employ grass runways, while all other major airports with civilian passenger operations were either built with or had been converted to asphalt runway surfaces. At 11:48 a.m., Golf Alpha Tango Echo Kilo made its approach to runway 36 at Portsmouth Airport, by which time cloud cover had reduced to 300 feet and the aircraft was not visible to controllers until it was essentially on short final, touching down 500 feet after crossing the displaced threshold at a speed of approximately 84 knots, the pilots applying ground-fine propeller pitch and continuous wheel braking, which led to an initial deceleration. However, it soon became apparent that in the later stages of the ground roll, the airliner was not going to stop within the available distance, and thus power was applied to the starboard engine in an attempt to induce a ground loop. But before this could take effect, the aircraft slid sideways to the left and came to rest on the top of an embankment which formed part of the airport's northern boundary, with the stewardesses leading an orderly evacuation of the 748 via the rear door within moments of it coming to rest. While the pilot of Golf Alpha Tango Echo Kilo, Captain Digby Paul Doherty, who sported a career of 6,000 flying hours, blamed the accident on the poor condition of the airport's runway surface, the airport manager claimed that it was Doherty's fault for undertaking a late fast touchdown and considered that the airport's runway was perfectly serviceable, the Channel Airways Operations Centre in Southend being contacted, who thus sided with the airport manager's appraisal of the runway condition and did not suspend 748 flights into the field. This led to the second flight, as operated by Golf Alpha Tango Echo Hotel, proceeding as scheduled to Portsmouth after its stopover in Guernsey, the wind having changed since the first accident as the airliner approached at around 13:34 p.m., thus meaning that an eastbound approach on runway 07 was utilised instead, the pilot, Captain Frank Percy Mann, an officer with 5,300 hours flying time, being aware of the poor condition of Portsmouth's runway during his earlier landing on the outbound flight to the Channel Islands. However, he was completely unaware of the accident that had occurred with sister ship Golf Alpha Tango Echo Kilo less than 2 hours earlier, and thus Mann brought the airliner in for its first approach, which resulted in a go-around after he had misjudged his speed and landed too fast, leading to several bounces before Mann opted to reapply power and climb back into the sky for another run. Coming in for a second approach on runway 07, The 748 touched down 336 feet beyond the displaced threshold at a speed of approximately 88 knots, with man immediately applying ground-fine propeller pitch and full-wheel braking, the aircraft initially decelerating as planned for the first two-thirds of the runway before all grip was suddenly lost and the airliner slid across the grass surface. Attempting a ground loop to the right, man chose to abandon this when he realized that it might direct his airliner into a car park and adjacent airport buildings, and thus the turboprop continued sliding forward down the centerline until it overshot the runway, broke through the perimeter fence, and came to rest on the A2030 Eastern Road, shearing off its landing gear in the process as it struck a raised bank to the side of the roadway, though fortunately there were no cars passing on what was normally a busy road. In the moments prior to the overshoot, the crew had turned off the engines and taken fire prevention action, while both they and the stewardesses, following the crash, evacuated the passengers at ground level through the main doors in a rapid but orderly fashion, the outcomes of both accidents being no injuries for any of the aircraft's occupants. For the two aircraft, Golf Alpha Tango Echo Kilo was generally undamaged by its overshoot and quickly recovered, while Golf Alpha Tango Echo Hotel, beyond losing its landing gear, was otherwise largely intact, though during recovery of the airliner, a botched attempt by unqualified personnel who tried to drag the 748 off the A2030 led to severe damage to the rear fuselage, this initial recovery crew being promptly dismissed and replaced by a trained RAF team with the correct equipment. In the immediate aftermath of the accidents, the surface of Portsmouth's runway was highlighted as the culprit, investigators noting that while preparation of the field's runway had been made through the sowing of special types of grass and the provision of surface drainage, no detailed technical examination of the subsoil had been undertaken. Following the incidents, such an examination was thus carried out, and from it investigators were able to determine that the ground onto which the runways were designated was comprised of 2 inches of turf covering an underlying clay soil which was in a hard, dry and compacted state that was almost completely impermeable, thereby meaning that natural drainage in the area was almost impossible, while the artificial drainage systems implemented by the airport were not sufficient to prevent accumulation of surface water. Friction trials soon followed, but the roughness of the surface limited the test vehicles to 20 miles an hour, while the surface was flooded to simulate the accident conditions, leading to an average braking coefficient of 0.2 mu, with a clearly defined tendency to decrease as speed increased. This lack of permeability at Portsmouth Airport was attested to by other 748 pilots, who noted that when landing at other grass airfields during rainy conditions, as the underlying surface was not made up of impermeable clay, the topsoil was much softer and thus caused the aircraft's wheels to sink slightly upon landing, which was considered to help in the deceleration process. To further investigate the part of the grass runway in the two accidents, a military variant of the HS-748, the Andover C-1, as operated by the Empire Tests Pilot School at RAF Boscombe Down, was employed during 1968 to undertake trials on varying grass surface types with different underlying soil bases. The outcomes of these studies confirmed that under conditions of pervasive rainfall, the runway at Portsmouth Airport, due to the hard clay base, was the equivalent of landing on an ice rink, with a braking coefficient of as little as 0.1 mu being exhibited, while a conventional hard runway surface, such as asphalt or concrete, provided a coefficient of 0.8 mu. As an outcome of further trials undertaken at Lympne Aerodrome with the Andover C-1, it was found that under the conditions exhibited at Portsmouth, a turboprop airliner like the 748 would require 2,612 feet in order to stop safely, though in order to accommodate any variations in flying technique or weight, this figure had the potential to increase to 3,400 feet. In the end, HS-748 operation at Portsmouth was deemed unsafe, and following a statement by the Chief Inspector of Accidents on August 18, 1967, in which it was stated that the Department of Trade and Industry should require a 30% wet grass surface landing distance increment, Channel Airways axed its operations to Portsmouth Airport, while blame was generally placed on the fact that the airport had not improved its infrastructure to accommodate larger aircraft like the 748. The loss of Channel Airways services and the outcomes of the accidents were essentially the death knell to Portsmouth Airport, and with there being little to no space for an expansion of the facility to incorporate additional parking facilities or extended runways due to urban developments to the west and south and the presence of Langstone Harbour to the north and east, the facility was closed on December 31, 1973, with this region of Hampshire now being served by Southampton Airport, 15 miles to the northwest. Ultimately, the accident involving two Channel Airways HS 748s at Portsmouth in the space of 2 hours came as a natural result of Portsmouth Airport's failure to improve its infrastructure in order to meet the challenges of newer, faster and larger aircraft that required better facilities and additional space than the earlier crop of sluggish piston-powered Vickers Vikings and Douglas DC-3s. However, while this unusual event has long been forgotten due to its lack of significant damage or casualties, it did result in an identification of the limitations presented to turboprop operations into certain airports, and that facilities should be improved across the industry in order to make space for larger and more complex airliner services going into the 1970s.